I should have turned back when my phone lost service. That's the thing about hindsight. It always arrives too late and too quietly to do any good. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old, a wildlife photographer based out of Portland. I've been doing this for 11 years. Forests don't scare me, or at least they didn't. This particular assignment started like every other one. An editor at a nature magazine had sent me a short note, heading into the Cascades for 10 days, looking for something raw, something real. That was it. No coordinates. No brief. Just 10 days and a vague idea of raw. I drove 4 hours northeast, parked my truck at a trailhead that barely had a sign, and started walking. The forest was stunning in that early October way. Gold and amber bleeding through the canopy, the air sharp and clean, like the world had just been washed. I had my camera, my pack, a satellite beacon for emergencies, and enough food for 12 days. I was prepared. I was confident. I was also completely, utterly alone. The trail thinned after the first 2 miles. By mile 4, it disappeared entirely. I switched to compass navigation and kept moving northeast, deeper into a section of old-growth forest that most people never reach. Late afternoon, I found a clearing beside a small creek and set up camp. The light was incredible. Long golden columns cutting through the Douglas firs, mist rising slowly off the water. I spent hours photographing it. I ate, I made notes in my journal, and I watched the sun go down. The last thing I wrote that night was simple. Perfect first day. This is why I do this. I didn't know then that the feeling wouldn't last. I didn't know that something had been watching me set up camp. And I didn't know that by morning, the world I thought I understood would start, slowly, quietly, to come apart. I fell asleep to the sound of the creek. I didn't notice the silence that replaced it sometime after midnight. The second day was normal. Mostly. I woke early, broke camp before first light, and pushed deeper into the forest. The canopy was so thick in places that sunrise barely reached the ground. Just a gray, diffuse glow that made everything look slightly unreal, like being inside a photograph that hadn't developed yet. I found a rocky outcropping around noon that gave me a view across a wide valley. I ate lunch there, spent an hour photographing a pair of ravens that seemed completely uninterested in me. Perfect subjects. I felt good, calm, at home. It was on the way down from the outcropping that I noticed the first thing. Pile of sticks, arranged in a rough circle maybe 2 feet across, in a small depression between 2 large roots. At the center, a single white stone. I stopped, looked around. No one. I told myself it was nothing. Hikers sometimes do strange things. Some kind of marker. I took a picture of it, professionally the way I document anything unusual in the field, and I moved on. But 3 hours later, I found another one. Same structure. Sticks in a rough circle. One white stone at the center. This one was larger, maybe 4 feet across. Placed deliberately in the middle of a narrow game trail, impossible to miss. There were no other human footprints in the mud around it. I stood there for a long time, looking at it. Then I looked up, into the trees ahead of me. The forest was completely still. Not the peaceful kind of still. The kind of still that happens when everything else has already stopped moving. Something felt wrong. I took a picture. I stepped around the circle. And I kept walking, telling myself to stop being dramatic. But I didn't set up camp in the clearing I'd originally planned. I chose a spot between 2 fallen logs instead, with my back against something solid, and I built my fire higher than I needed to. I told myself it was for warmth. That night, around 2 in the morning, I heard something walk past my camp. Heavy, slow, and then it stopped right outside the light of my fire. I didn't move. I've been in the backcountry long enough to know that most things in the forest at night are completely harmless. Deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear that wants nothing to do with you. I know how they sound. I know their rhythms. This didn't sound like any of them. The footsteps were too slow, too deliberate. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. It wasn't startled by the fire or by my scent. It was just moving. And then it wasn't moving anymore. I sat up slowly and aimed my headlamp at the tree line, maybe 15 feet from my camp. Nothing. Just trees. Just shadow. The normal architecture of a dark forest. But here's the thing about headlamps in forests at night. You see what the light reaches and nothing beyond it. And what I kept thinking, what I couldn't stop thinking, was that the darkness just outside the beam was deep enough to hide almost anything. I held the light steady. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Nothing moved. I eventually lay back down, heart still loud in my ears, and told myself, bear. Curious black bear. They do that sometimes, stop and smell the air. Completely normal. I almost believed it. In the morning, I walked to the tree line and looked at the ground. There were impressions in the soft earth. Not clear enough to be identified, the ground was too thick with pine needles. But the spacing between them was wrong for a bear. Too far apart. Too narrow. Was it real? I photographed them. I measured the distance between them with my hand. I noted it in my journal. Something bipedal? Or a large animal with an unusual gait? Unknown. And then, because I'm a professional and professionals don't abandon a job, I packed up and kept going north. I didn't find a third stick circle that day. But that afternoon, I found something worse. Nailed to a tree at eye level, wrapped in dried grass and what looked like crow feathers, was a small wooden figure, shaped unmistakably like a person. I need you to understand something about the figure. It wasn't crude. It wasn't the kind of thing you carve with a pocket knife on a rainy afternoon. It had proportions. Wait, someone had taken real time making it. The wood was dark and smooth, almost polished. The wrapping of dried grass was tight and deliberate, and the crow feathers, 4 of them, were tucked into it at angles that looked almost ceremonial. It was about 8 inches tall, and it was looking at me, or rather, its face was turned in my direction. I know that sounds like I'm projecting. I'm a photographer, not a superstitious person, but standing there in front of that tree, looking at that figure, I had the very clear and very physical sensation that something was watching me through it. I photographed it from every angle. I wrote a detailed description in my journal. Tried to remember if I'd read about any indigenous practices in this particular region that might explain it, and I came up empty. The Cascade Range has a complex history. There are stories, but nothing I knew matched this. I didn't touch it. Something told me, strongly, clearly, not to touch it. I moved on, but I kept checking over my shoulder for the rest of the afternoon. Not because I expected to see anything, just because the sensation of being watched had started, and it wouldn't stop. An hour before sunset, I found the old cabin. It was barely standing, roof half collapsed, walls black with age and moisture, door long gone. The kind of structure that's been folded back into the forest over decades. I almost missed it because the trees had grown up around it so thoroughly that it looked like part of the landscape. But what stopped me wasn't the cabin. It was what was hanging from the branches above it. Dozens of figures, the same as the one on the tree or close enough, hung from the branches by thin cords of braided grass, turning slowly in a wind I couldn't feel. Some were old, gray with age, the grass nearly dust. Some looked new. One of them was still warm when I reached out and touched the cord it hung from. I pulled my hand back, counted my heartbeats. Then I heard something move inside the cabin. I stood very still and listened, and from the deep dark inside that collapsed doorway came a sound. Barely a sound, like breathing. Her name was Margaret. She came out of the shadows on her own terms, which meant slowly and without apology, as if I were the one who had wandered into her living room. She was old, genuinely old, the kind of age that stops being a number and becomes a quality. Her face was deeply lined, her hair the color of smoke, her eyes clear and very dark and focused on me with an attention that made me feel slightly transparent. She carried a walking stick. She wore layers that seemed to have been assembled over several decades. And she looked at me the way you look at something you expected to show up eventually. "You've been in here 2 days," she said. "Not a question." "3," I said. She considered this. "You've seen the circles." Again, not a question. Her name was Margaret Hale, and she'd been living in and around this section of forest for, by her own account, most of her adult life. She was not what you'd call forthcoming. Every piece of information arrived after a pause, like she was deciding in real time how much to give me. She told me the circles were markers. "Warnings," she said, "or invitations, depending on your perspective." She told me the figures were not made by her. She found them sometimes the way I did, already there. And when I asked her, carefully, what made them, she looked at me with those dark eyes and said something I've thought about every day since. "The forest has residents you won't find in any field guide." She fed me tea. She didn't ask why I was there. She talked around the subject the way a stream moves around a rock, never directly touching it but always close. When I asked if I was in danger, she was quiet for a long time. "They've been here longer than the trees," she finally said. "Longer than anything you have a name for. They don't want anything from you exactly, but they notice things. They notice you." She let me sleep in the cabin that night on the floor, near the remains of a small fire. I didn't sleep much. Around midnight I heard her outside, moving among the hanging figures, making small sounds I couldn't quite categorize as words. In the morning, Margaret was gone, and the figure I'd photographed on the tree, the first one, was sitting in the center of my camera bag, which I had zipped shut. I need to be clear about this. I am a careful person. I am methodical. I've spent 11 years in the field and I know how my equipment works, where it is, and what I put in it. The camera bag had been on my back or beside me since I entered the forest. It had been zipped shut. The figure was inside it anyway. I picked it up with 2 fingers, set it on a log, and stared at it for a while. It stared back, in the way that things without faces manage sometimes to stare. I left it there and continued packing. Then I checked my camera's memory card. I'd taken approximately 240 photographs over 3 days. Most of them were what I expected: trees, light, birds, landscape, the circles, the cabin. But somewhere around image 190, things changed. I hadn't taken these images. Or rather, the camera had, but not me. The exposures were wrong for my usual style. The angles were from positions I hadn't stood in. And they were almost entirely black, long exposures in near total darkness, except for a center point of faint light. In one image, that light was shaped vaguely like a figure. In another, it was closer. In the final unauthorized image, image 241, it was very close. So close that the frame was almost entirely filled with something I couldn't fully process. Not a face, not a body, something in between. Something my brain kept sliding off of like it was the wrong shape for human perception. It was watching me. I deleted the images. I know that sounds irrational, and I know what the rational thing would have been, to keep them, to show someone, to have evidence. But standing in that dark cabin with those images on my screen, I had the very strong and very animal feeling that keeping them was not a good idea. I deleted them. I'll never know if that was the right choice. What I do know is that, after I deleted them, the forest outside went very quiet. And then, after a few seconds, something moved in the undergrowth very deliberately, away from the cabin, like it had been waiting to see what I'd do. I decided it was time to leave. I started south back toward my truck, moving fast. I was making good time, until the trail I was following simply ended. In the middle of a clearing I had never seen before. I had a compass. I had a map. I had 11 years of backcountry navigation. None of it explained the clearing. It was large, maybe 200 feet across, perfectly circular, which is unusual enough in nature to stop you cold. No trees grew in it. The grass was green in a way that seemed too vivid for October, too saturated, like a color correction applied to the real world. At the center was a large flat stone, and on the stone was an arrangement I recognized. The circles, the markers, but larger than any I'd seen and complex. Concentric rings of stones, smaller figures arranged in precise patterns. And at the very center, one object I hadn't expected. My satellite beacon, which had been in the outer pocket of my pack. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, did not enter, looked at the beacon on the stone and understood, on some level I couldn't fully articulate, that this was a choice being offered to me. That entering the clearing would mean something. That not entering would mean something else. Behind me, the forest was quiet. Ahead of me, the clearing breathed. I know that's not a literal description, but it's the accurate one. The air above it moved differently. The light moved differently. It was like standing at the edge of a room that didn't follow the same rules as the rest of the house. I heard something then, not behind me, not ahead of me, but seemingly from everywhere and nowhere. A low sound, almost below hearing, that I felt more in my chest than in my ears. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was more like attention. Like being looked at by something so large that being looked at by it felt like a change in air pressure. Why are you here? The question seemed to arrive without a source. I don't know if I heard it or thought it. I stood at the edge of that clearing for a long time. The beacon sat on the stone. My phone had no signal. My map showed no clearing in this location. And then I heard Margaret's voice somewhere behind me. Calm and close. Don't go in unless you mean it. I turned. She wasn't there. I left the beacon. I walked around the edge of the clearing, not through it, keeping my eyes on the tree line, and something kept pace with me the entire way, moving parallel in the trees, never quite visible. I didn't make it out that day. The forest seemed longer than it should have been. My compass readings were consistent. My map was in agreement. But the trail back to my truck, which should have taken 6 hours, kept not arriving. The light dropped, and I made camp again, this time without a fire. Something about lighting a fire felt wrong, like making an announcement. This was my 8th night in the forest, and it was the most alive the forest had ever been. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened. The sounds were not threatening exactly, but they were constant and they were present in a way that 3 days earlier they hadn't been. Movement in the canopy. Something large shifting its weight in the dark. Twice, a sound like low voices, too far away to parse words from, too regular to be random. Around midnight, something crouched at the edge of my peripheral vision. I didn't look directly at it. This was instinctive. Something in me understood that looking directly was the wrong move. I kept my eyes forward and watched it the way you watch something underwater, only in the corners of your sight. It was large. It was still. And it was patient in a way that living things generally are not. Patient the way stone is patient. The way something is patient when time moves differently for it than for you. We stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes. Stay. Not threatening, not demanding, just offered. I didn't move. I didn't speak. And eventually it left. Slowly, quietly, back into the dark, and the forest exhaled around me. I lay still until morning, thinking about what Margaret had said. They don't want anything from you exactly, but they notice things. And I thought about what it means to be noticed by something that has been here longer than the trees. The first light, I started walking again. And this time, the forest let me go. almost gently the way a hand opens. Took 2 more hours. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, covered in frost and pine needles, the trailhead sign just barely visible through the trees. The parking lot was empty. The road was empty. The whole world felt hollow and very bright. I sat in my truck for a while before I could make myself start it. My hands were shaking slightly, which surprised me. I hadn't felt scared during the final hours of walking. I'd felt something closer to grief, actually, like something was ending that I hadn't asked to end. The forest had been pulling back with each step I took toward the road, becoming quieter, stiller, more ordinary. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was just a forest again. I went through my notes and my photographs over the following weeks. I could not explain the camera images. My equipment has never malfunctioned in 11 years, not like that. The images I deleted, I can still see them clearly in my memory, even now, even though I know that the human brain is not a reliable recorder. What I remember seeing doesn't translate into words very well. What I keep coming back to is the sense in that final photograph that whatever was in the frame was not frightening because it was terrible. It was frightening because it was real. I tried to find Margaret Hale. I searched county records, property records, Forest Service databases. The cabin I'd stayed in didn't appear on any map. The clearing with the flat stone wasn't there when I looked at satellite images of the area. Not a clearing, not a stone, just continuous forest canopy stretching in every direction. I published a short photo essay from the trip. Landscapes, mostly. Ravens. Light through trees. I didn't include the images of the circles or the figures. I don't know exactly why. Felt like a decision that had already been made for me. 2 months later, I got a message from another photographer, someone I don't know, out of Montana, who'd been working the Bob Marshall Wilderness. She'd found circles of sticks, wooden figures, a clearing that wasn't on her map. She wanted to know if I'd experienced anything similar. I started to type a reply. Then I stopped. I wasn't sure how to explain it in a way that would help her. And I wasn't sure, honestly, whether what I had to say was a warning or an invitation. I saved the message as a draft. I still haven't sent it. I've been back to the Cascades twice since that October. Not to the same section. I've avoided that area, for reasons I can't fully defend rationally. But nearby, close enough that on both trips, I found, once each, a circle of sticks with a white stone at the center. I photographed them. I moved on. Nothing else happened, or nothing I could prove happened. Here is what I believe, and I want to be careful here because I am a person who works in evidence, in images, in what the lens captures and confirms. I am not someone who trades in belief easily. I believe that there are things in the old-growth forests of North America that have not been cataloged. Not because they've been hidden, and not because they're supernatural, I'm not comfortable with that word, but because they exist in a register that we are not well equipped to observe directly. Our instruments miss them. Our attention slides off them. Our memories reconstruct them incorrectly. They've been reported for as long as there have been people in those forests to report them. The descriptions shift across centuries and cultures. Sasquatch, Wendigo, skinwalkers, forest spirits, nameless things glimpsed at the edge of firelight. The shapes change depending on who's looking and what framework they're using to look. But the core of the report stays consistent. The sense of being watched from just outside visibility. The manipulation of objects. The sounds. The presence. Consistent across cultures, across centuries, across thousands of square miles of forest that no single human community could have organized a story about. You shouldn't be here. I don't think that means leave. I think it means you are in something larger than you understand. Pay attention. The wooden figure that appeared in my camera bag is on my desk right now. I've never been able to make myself throw it away. Some mornings I come into my office and it's in a slightly different position than I left it. I'm telling myself that's the settling of the wood. Humidity changes. Normal things. And every week or so, I open that unsent message to the photographer in Montana. I haven't decided yet whether some doors should stay closed. But I notice that my cursor hovers over the send button for a little longer each time. The figure is looking at me right now. It always is.